U.S. relations with Russia seem to be getting frostier by the day, and in an unprecedented move, the Russian military says it now plans to send strategic bombers on regular patrol in America's backyard. David Martin is looking into this.
Russian bomber patrols over the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico would be very significant, U.S. military officers say, something the Russians have never done before. During the Cold War, Soviet aircraft flew reconnaissance missions there, but never bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Once in 2008 and again in 2013, blackjack bombers flew to Nicaragua and Venezuela, but those were window dressing for visits by high-level Russian delegations. When the Russian defense minister announced the bomber patrols earlier this week, he linked them specifically to tensions over Ukraine, in effect saying, if you meddle in our backyard, we'll meddle in yours. U.S. military officers say the patrols would not pose a military threat, since the bombers and their refueling tankers could be tracked as they came down through Greenland and Iceland and across the Atlantic, leaving plenty of time to scramble jet fighters. A real attack by Russian bombers would most likely come over the North Pole, the shortest distance between the two countries. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia stopped flying long-range bomber patrols and did not resume until 2007. Currently, they fly about 10 patrols a year off the U.S. coast, once coming within 50 miles of California. U.S. jets routinely intercept them. There's no law against it, so long as the bombers don't enter U.S. airspace. With President Obama and Russia's Putin attending the same summit in Australia this weekend, these new patrols are an in-your-face way of saying we're a global power and we're not going to let you push us around.
We're going to breaking news now. These pictures are just in of President Barack Obama's car arriving in Brisbane ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit. Nicknamed the Beast, it's designed to withstand a rocket attack.
But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make a way. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy wood. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him.
From Scripture we learn of the miracle of restoration. You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depths of the earth you will bring me up again. You will increase my greatness and comfort me again.
A top NATO commander says Russian tanks and troops are moving into eastern Ukraine. Moscow denies those claims. The development comes after Russia announced new Air Force training exercises near United States borders. David Martin is at the Pentagon with the military's response. David, good morning.
Good morning. When Russia's defense minister announced plans for these new long-range bomber patrols, he linked them specifically to tensions over Ukraine, telling the U.S., in effect, if you meddle in our backyard, we'll meddle in yours. The announcement of the new patrols comes just as President Obama and Russia's Putin are set to attend the same summit this weekend in Australia. Both men surely know having bombers circle around to the south of the U.S. doesn't make much military sense. The bombers and their refueling tankers could be tracked all the way across the Atlantic, leaving plenty of time to scramble interceptor jets. Benjamin Friedman is a research fellow at the Cato Institute.
Politically, it's important. It shows that Russia's trying to sort of show its relevance and poke its finger in the U.S. eye and say, look, we're still here, we still matter, we're something you have to deal with and plan for.
There's no indication yet when these new patrols would begin or how often they would be conducted.
With dramatic pitches and steep banks, China shows off its next-generation fighter plane. This is the J-31, a stealth fighter.
It can come in, as the U.S. has stealth fighters, stealth bombers, come in a full-up radar environment and not be detected.
Analysts say this jet could be designed for mid to low altitude attacks and may be deployed from an aircraft carrier. The J-31 looks stunningly like a late model American stealth fighter, the F-35.
It's been pretty clear, and I think the U.S. government has been pretty clear in making its claims, which I have no reason to doubt, that Chinese hackers have been targeting defense contractors, U.S. government facilities, and others.
Several published reports say the Chinese got the blueprints for the F-35 through a cyber assault on a contractor for Lockheed Martin and built their fighter jet with the same specs. The Chinese have denied that. China tested the J-31 right as President Obama was in Beijing for the Asia-Pacific Summit. It comes on the heels of China christening its first aircraft carrier, sending ships to islands whose territory has long been disputed. Analysts say this isn't about confronting America militarily, but about reducing U.S. military influence in its neighborhood.
What the Chinese military is trying to do is to be able to put their military out further from China, out into the Pacific, in the air, under the sea, and on the sea, in order to deter others from coming too close to China.
It's also about prestige. It's also about the status of China. It's also about using platforms like aircraft carriers to perform what's called military operations other than war, humanitarian relief, that kind of thing. The United States uses its aircraft carriers for that purpose quite a lot.
China now flexing more military muscle. One of these two powers is going to be so concerned someday with projection of power in the Pacific that it's going to overreact in a crisis, or that it might escalate what seems now to be an arms race.
Lurking in the freezing waters of Sweden last month, a hidden danger. This was a major hunt launched by the Swedish Navy to find a suspected Russian submarine off their coast. The Swedes said they would force it to the surface if they could find it. They couldn't. But it's one of a growing number of potentially explosive incidents that one London-based think tank says is putting the Kremlin on a collision course with the West.
Our report singles out 11 serious incidents. Here we are talking about the aircrafts flying really close to each other. We are talking about harassment of warships. We are talking about simulated attacks conducted by the Russian fighters against targets in Sweden, Denmark, and the United States.
The report, called Dangerous Brinkmanship, says a mix of more aggressive Russian posturing and readiness of Western forces to show resolve is increasing the risk of escalation. As well as the 11 serious incidents, the report also details 3 high-risk ones, which in its view carried a high probability of causing casualties. One was the submarine search, another was a narrowly avoided collision between an SAS civilian airliner taking off from Copenhagen and a Russian reconnaissance plane. SAS have confirmed to CNN the incident took place last March. The third high-risk incident, says the report, was the abduction of an Estonian intelligence officer shortly after President Obama visited the country, a NATO ally, in September. Moscow says he was arrested for spying on Russian soil.
Of course, even if such incident happens, it doesn't lead automatically into a full-blown war. The problem is that we have less and less direct contact between the militaries on the both sides. If we don't have this kind of established channels of communication, even one incident can simply lead to an escalation that neither of the sides really want.
It may not be a new Cold War with Russia, not yet, but the risk of miscalculation has echoes of that much more dangerous time.
Russian forces on the move again into eastern Ukraine. Preparations, Ukrainian officials tell CNN, for a new offensive by pro-Russian separatists.
We have seen columns of Russian equipment, primarily Russian tanks, Russian artillery, Russian air defense systems, and Russian combat troops entering into Ukraine.
And NATO says they've observed something even more alarming. Russian warplanes capable of carrying nuclear weapons deployed to Crimea, annexed by Russia illegally earlier this year. If confirmed, the step could violate multiple international treaties.
We see forces that are capable of being nuclear that are being moved to Crimea. Whether they are or not, we do not know, but they do have the kind of equipment there that could support that mission.
Russia's foreign ministry immediately denied the claims, calling them, quote, unfounded. The new weapons, accompanied by renewed fierce fighting between Ukrainian forces and separatists, has all but ended a brief, shaky ceasefire. Expressing alarm in both public and private, Ukrainian officials say they are now preparing to fight.
We expect unexpected actions from them. I see it as our main task to prepare for military action.
Today, at a UN Security Council session on the situation in Ukraine, Ambassador Samantha Power condemned Russia's actions.
Russia has negotiated a peace plan and then systematically undermined it at every step. It talks of peace, but it keeps fueling war.
As security is ramped up for the G20, defence chiefs are closely monitoring a convoy of Russian warships just outside Australian waters. The government says it has known about their movements for some time and admits it's unusual.
A daisy chain of world leaders, arm in Myanmar, a symbol of unity. But Tony Abbott at one end and Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev at the other, a symbol of division, as a group of Russian warships steams closer to Australia.
Certainly it is unusual for Russian naval elements to be in Australian waters. Unusual, not entirely unprecedented, but unusual.
Defence sources say the 4 Russian ships led by the guided missile destroyer Varyag are moving south-southeast, skirting Australian territorial waters. The frigates HMAS Stuart and HMAS Parramatta are flanking them, and P3 Orions are flying regular sorties from Townsville, tracking their movements.
That's what we do. When warships are approaching Australia, we keep them well monitored.
A Russian embassy spokesman said they would not enter Australian waters. We stick to the rules, nobody wants conflict. He described it as a routine exercise, but an admission. Your reaction is not that surprising because we do rarely go this way.
Russia is entitled, as any other country is entitled, to traverse international waters. Is it a show of force? Well, it's a significant country with a significant navy.
I don't think we should play the Putin game of engaging in his stunts.
This naval display is obviously timed for the weekend's G20. Tony Abbott says it would have been months in the planning, but the Kremlin's confirmed the flotilla left Vladivostok on October 23, 10 days after Tony Abbott threatened to shirt front Vladimir Putin.
Let's not forget that Russia has been much more militarily assertive in recent times.
Like sending nuclear submarines to Scandinavia, warships off Crimea, troops crossing into Ukraine, long-range bombers flying over Central America, and now its Pacific Fleet skirting Australian waters.
I think the rest of the world is watching closely what Russia does because there is an element of unpredictability about it.
And this week, the world's watching the G20 in Brisbane.
This is a rare view inside the fighting in eastern Ukraine. A gun battle at the airport in Donetsk. Then a rebel tank fires and destroys a Ukrainian military position. These are Ukrainian forces battling separatists armed and supported by Russia. And now more Russian heavy weapons are on the way. New images of Russian military vehicles and artillery rolling into Ukraine. Ukraine's president says his country has lost control of its eastern border.
The Ukrainian-Russian border, under independent monitoring, is repeatedly crossed by the Russian regular forces.
Now, those same Russian forces say NATO's supreme allied commander are firing at drones from the International Observer Mission. Reiterating Moscow's frequent denials, today the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman said no Russian forces of any kind are in Ukraine.
There are no military forces or any military movement across the border. And moreover, there is no presence of our troops in the territory of Ukraine.
On the map, you can see how Russia has, in effect, now occupied territory inside eastern Ukraine. It's this area here that is under the control of pro-Russian separatists. I'm going to show you here, these are positions of Russian weapon systems as identified by Ukrainian authorities. You can see missile launchers here, tank divisions, and then these troop divisions along the border are what U.S. officials say are 8,000 to 9,000 Russian troops positioned along the border. And that border here, the red area